Hey guys, I'm Mark. This is my channel, Several Books. Today what I'm going to be doing is going over just what I've been reading lately. It's been a lot of theory. I haven't read a lot of novels in the past probably month. But I did read a novel that I finished this morning. It's probably one of the more difficult novels I've ever read. I read it in French. I'm not advising it as a get started here work in French, but I have been reading French for several years, so I have a lot of practice with it. The novel is Claude Simon's La Route de Flanders, and it's available by NYRB, so I'll talk about that. But basically what's going on with me is I am interested in trying to expand my knowledge base for theory. It is, of course, as I've mentioned before, a dream of mine that one day I would have the opportunity to study at some kind of institution for an advanced degree. Right now I'm very satisfied with my work, but it is, of course, something that's always been a bit of a dream. I realized that if I were to study French theory at an institution, one thing that I would be missing from my reading would be secondary reading, histories of authors and so forth, things like textbooks, collections, and the editorial work that you see associated with great editions of books. So I did read some secondary sources on what is called the post-structuralist movement. There is a book by a man named Francois Cousset, I think is how I'd say that. It's called French theory in France. They don't call the post-structuralist movement post-structuralism. They refer to it as French theory because it was in large part driven by U.S. interest, to my understanding. That's not to say that these people were unknown in France. They were, of course, public intellectuals and had definite celebrity pool to some degree. So what I'm going to do is basically just go through what I've been reading. Like I said, it's been mostly theory. That book by Francois Cousset, I'm still waiting on my edition. I had decided to buy a copy of it, and online saw a very interesting cover. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll pay the extra money for a hardcover edition with this cool cover. It's not significantly more expensive than buying the book in an English edition. And it turns out that I bought a graphic novel, a bande dessinée, and it's on the same subject, but it's a graphic novel. It's not the actual history that I was looking for. So I am going to read that graphic novel. I'm planning on that, and Cousset's book called French Theory, but at the moment I don't have that. I am currently in the process of reading Frederic Jameson's The Years of Theory. I'm going to talk about that briefly here. And yeah, we'll go from there. So that's what we're looking at today. Probably not a super long video. Again, I'm Mark, and this is Several Books. So the first book I want to talk about that I've read in the past, say, month and a half is Language Counter-Memory Practice. That's by Michel Foucault. This is a collection of Foucault's essays. Now, I read French. It's part of the interest is the French philosophy from the mid-century. And one thing I've noticed is that a lot of collections like this are available in English but not available in French. So if I were trying to read all of Foucault in French, I'd probably be better suited to read something like a Œuvre complète, or there's a Bibliothèque de la Pléiade de Foucault maintenant. So there is now a Bibliothèque de la Pléiade. This essay collection, in my opinion, was not significant. I saw it on a site for a reading list of post-structuralist works. This is something that's advised to, I guess you'd call post-grad work or something like that. The probably for me most interesting essay in here is What is an Author? Foucault essentially takes a point to say that when we refer to concepts and ideas by an author's last name, we're doing a disservice to those things. So he says that there needs to be a new way to reference those things, essentially. And so that's what that essay is about. If you've never read any Foucault, my opinion is that you should probably read Discipline and Punish and History of Sexuality. The Order of Things is very good as well. It's my preference of those three works, but when I was in college, I came across History of Sexuality, and I think Discipline and Punish. Order of Things was not in my immediate field of vision. I became more interested with that later. But that is what I would recommend first. Probably one of those three. This isn't a terrible collection. You get some interviews with Foucault as well, and some other thinkers. But it's just that, in my opinion, there are better works by Foucault. So check this out if you're interested. But this is more of something for a completionist. Now, the next thing I'm going to mention that I read was these two secondary books about French structuralism, or post-structuralism. They're by a man named Gary Guttings, and the first is called French Philosophy in the 20th Century. This was a very good book. I did learn a lot about writers who I had not read and had not heard a great amount about. For instance, Bergson. I knew Bergson mostly because I knew that he also taught Alfred Jarry, but I knew that he was a Nobel-winning philosopher. I just never actually interacted with his ideas. Gary Guttings is writing a history. He's not really writing a philosophy book, so you're not getting a hefty amount of stuff about the specifics of Bergson's philosophical achievements. That said, you are getting at minimum, a note of his position in history and how he influenced the philosophers, especially in France, that came after him. Where he goes from there is mostly Sartre and de Beauvoir, and he takes a position that Sartre was démodé, essentially. And he draws a sharp distinction between the post-structuralists and Sartre. Now, I am also reading Frederic Jameson's The Years of Theory in the moment, and he takes a very different view of Sartre, so it seems like there might be a sort of divide between how different thinkers view Sartre in French philosophy. It's not to say that I had never heard that Sartre was polarizing, but to read a work specifically about the history of French philosophy from two different authors and to get such a difference was surprising. So that's just a note about Guttings. Now, I've read Sartre's Nausea and The Age of Reason. I read a section of Being and Nothingness years ago, but that was really before I had read more philosophy books. That said, Sartre was very influential for me when I was starting college. I read Camus and then discovered Sartre by way of Camus, and I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I can't give the completely unbiased opinion because my late teenage years were so shaped by Jean-Paul Sartre. Now, the other book that he has is called Thinking the Impossible. And this is basically a book that focuses on Derrida, Deleuze, and Foucault. I had not read any substantial biographical information about Deleuze or Foucault. I knew a bit about Foucault's history growing up, that he was under observation by psychiatrists and had been institutionalized for a period of his time, but I didn't know certain things about their more professional life and the way those were shaped. Also, much of my understanding of a lot of this movement comes out of little drops throughout my college education, and then discovery of things online and looking at lists, the most important philosophers of the 20th century type lists, things like that. So, of course, seeing a secondary source that might be used in some kind of university education that really fleshes these things out is very interesting to me because my experience of these things is so personal. So it's like, oh, this is actually something that I care about being represented by a university person. That's interesting to me. So I do like both these books. I wouldn't know what to rate them. My strategy was to get more secondary information about the post-structuralist movement, and I simply asked around online. So I'm reading books that I was recommended. These are great though. So the Gary Guttings book is very interesting. Now, I did want to note what I'm currently reading because it is in the process of reading secondary information about the post-structuralist movement, getting more impressions of accomplished people, and further learning history and such. I'm reading The Years of Theory, Post-War French Thought to the Present by Frederic Jameson. I don't know if any of you have read Jameson. I've read An American Utopia, and I've read Postmodernism, or Cultural Memory in the Present, I think is the full title. But I've read both of those. Frederic Jameson, to me, is kind of someone you would call like a philosopher. I understand he's a literary theorist, and there's a difference, but that's the type of reading that you're engaging in. This is an overview of several different authors, but it does get more into the philosophizing than Gary Guttings' book. One thing that I want to note is that Jameson is gushing about Sartre. His opinion isn't that Sartre was perfect, but there are so many positive things that he writes about Sartre. He takes up multiple chapters of the book, and when we're getting information about Simone de Beauvoir and Fanon, there's always Sartre present. In my opinion, this is probably a pretty good book. So far it is. I got to through the first chapter of Lacan, and I've read 7 books by Lacan. I definitely want to get more background information about him. I think I might read a biography if I can find one. I understand that the translator in English, Bruce Fink, had some nasty things to say about a biography that was recently published, but I don't really know enough about the books on that subject. Anyway, yeah, I've read 7 books by Lacan, and I got through the first chapter of Lacan in here, and it's about the midway point of the book. The book's about 40 pages, it looks like, and I'm around page 200 something. 190, it looks like. And I wanted to take a break and read a novel. I wanted to read something in French, and I just realized now, talking about this, that there is another book that I'm going to add to this list of things that I've been reading. In my opinion, this is probably going to be a highly recommended book. if you want secondary information on the post-structuralist movement. Frederic Jameson is a solid writer. He's an interesting man, or was. He's no longer with us. But that's the years of theory, post-war French thought to the present. Now, as I said, there was another book that I wanted to mention, and that's Georges Bataille's Théorie de la Religion. And we tried that podcast for my friend, and I'm going to continue to try to work with that. That's his idea, and that was on religion, basically, and Christianity more specifically. To kind of try to prepare for that podcast, I read this book. There were other things that I had read in the past, but this is something that I read more recently. In the end, we never ended up talking about any of the subjects in Théorie de la Religion. But it's an interesting book. It's not... He doesn't argue that sacrifice is such a central part of religion in a very in-your-face way, but he spends a huge amount of time in this book compared to other subjects kind of discussing sacrifice. And so you get a sense of that through reading that, like, this is something that Bataille thinks is really central to what religion is. In my opinion, if you're really going to try to get Bataille's theory, you want to read Le Part Maudit. It's Le Part Maudit, Histoire de l'érotisme and Souveraineté. And that's published in English in 2 volumes rather than 3. The first is The Accursed Share, and the second has the history of eroticism and sovereignty. Now, sovereignty contains a lot of stuff from Nietzsche, and also contradictorily, he seems to mention Hegel and be aware of Hegel in that context. I have seen people question online, are there any people who seem to try to fuse the two? Although Bataille might not be the most central philosopher in the world, he does seem to be influenced by Kojève's lectures and Nietzsche as well. I don't know if he would have read Hegel. That would have been in the 40s. So I'm not sure where Bataille was in his writing. I don't know his publication history well enough. Regardless, I did read Théorie de la Religion. It's available, Theory of Religion, in English. I think it's expensive. It's like $30 for a book that's about 150 pages long. It's not the most pressing Bataille. There are more interesting books, in my opinion, as I said, that you should probably check out. Okay, so the final book that I'm going to talk about is the novel that I finished this morning, La Route du Flanders, and the Flanders Road. It's published by NYRB in English. I don't want to start shifting the focus away from me to other podcasts, so I'm not going to say specifically the podcast I was watching. But I saw a host on a podcast talk about this book in English and described it as fragmented and hallucinatory. And I knew the book existed before that, and I have read Claude Simon's Le Tramway. And hearing a book described as fragmented and hallucinatory immediately got my interest. I knew that this is about a war, so I knew it was much different than Le Tramway. Le Tramway is a a story of a trolley, and there aren't really characters in the book. It's really about this trolley. It's a very unusual novel. I read it and I thought it was okay. I had it as a list of top 100 novels that had been compiled by somebody on 4chan or something. basically recommending one of the novels was Le Tramway. So I checked it out. Like I said, it was okay, but not my favorite. Fragmented and hallucinatory. I heard that. It's like, okay, this is about a war and it's experimental like that. I've got to check it out. I got about 50 pages into this, and I put it down and I bought a Bibliothèque de la Pléiade of Claude Simon. I understand this is way different than Le Tramway, but I basically immediately at that point had decided that I have to read Claude Simon's work. My understanding is that a lot of it is pretty significantly different than the war story that is La Route de Flanders, but it was so powerful, this book. So if I'm going to compare this to anything, what I'm going to compare it to first is Faulkner. I saw a review online that said it's like Benji's section in The Sound and the Fury, just as a whole book. I don't totally agree with that. Benji's section in The Sound and the Fury is the first chapter that's famously incredibly difficult because Benji doesn't really have a good concept of time. And so he confuses things that he's lived through in the past with things that are actively happening around him. My opinion is that this is more like Absalom. Now, Absalom has war stuff in it as well, so there's a direct connection there. But we also get the time changes that are more clean, in my opinion, although certainly extremely disjointing in Absalom in comparison with, or that's what we're getting. So I'm comparing this to Absalom. The book is not entirely the war. There is some romance going on, some adultery. It sounds like two people are having or have had an affair with an officer's wife, and the officer is killed in this battle. The book is essentially about what happens to a soldier when France had a cavalry until World War II. And if that sounds anachronistic, that's because it is anachronistic. And Claude Simon was actually in that cavalry. And what happened was that in 1880, if there was a battle, the cavalry would come in and essentially win the battle for that side. The cavalry was always the best military unit or battalion, whatever the word is. I'm not somebody who knows a great deal about military history. So that esteem was held for the cavalry much longer in France than was appropriate. And in World War II, in the beginning of World War II, they had a cavalry, and it went to come in and do its thing. And the other side had modern weapons. And horses are not tanks. You can kill horses with gunshots. You don't have to do whatever you have to do to destroy a tank. And so the book is basically about the shock that happens when this entire battalion gets wiped out. Now there's all this other more specific stuff happening with, I think his name is Reichach or Reichardt. So it's a difficult name to pronounce. There's an X in it. I think it's Reixach. I don't know how to pronounce that name. I don't know the country of origin. But he, he's got this wife and all this other stuff. A lot of what really came through to me, though, what grounds the story in a different way, is this meditation on the destruction in war. There are sections of this book that just have no punctuation. It'll have an apostrophe because in France, if you say l'aile, the wing, You put an L there and then an apostrophe to say the, and that's how you write that in French. But there are no commas, guillemets, which are the French punctuation for quotations. No terminal punctuation for sentences, so no periods, exclamation points, question marks. And there's a section in here that, if I'm remembering right, it must have been like 20 pages, I think, where there's just no punctuation. The book is largely in multiple page long paragraphs, if you can call them that. But the real thing is that this order created by conventional grammar and typography on the face of the page is it's destroyed, it's denigrated. So the real thing that he's got going for him in these sections, where it's just these oddly punctuated, essentially walls of text, is the rhythm of the speech. So it's as difficult as reading Absalom, Absalom. If you watch my channel and are really good at French, at a point where you could read Absalom, Absalom in a different language, that is basically where you need to be for this. I love this book. Like I said, I just immediately went out and bought the rest of his catalog. I'm waiting on it, and I'll be reading it as soon as I get it, sometime in the next week or two. What I'm going to try to do also is finish the Frederic Jameson, and I've got a book of Foucault, another collection of essays. It's much larger. I'm going to try to read that as well. But after I read this, Claude Simon is like my focus. I'm blown away. Anything that is not as good as this, and I expect to not like his other work as much, is still going to be worth my time, in my opinion, because I was just so blown away by this work. This is my favorite piece of fiction I've read this year. I have been reading more theory than a lot of fiction this year, but as far as reading experience goes, this was my favorite reading experience I've had this year. I'm not going to talk about Ferdinand de Saussure's Cours de Linguistique Générale because historically that is probably the most significant book I've read this year. That used to be like a Bible of sorts for the French post-structuralist movement, but I did not enjoy reading de Saussure nearly as much as I enjoyed La Route de Flanders. So this is a great book. It's available by NYRB, and I really encourage you to check it out. All right, guys. So that's pretty much everything. I am going to be working with my friend to make another podcast. My other friend seems to have backed out of that, but he might show interest in this second edition. We're still working out how we're going to do topics for conversations in that group. Basically, do we want to do more presentation-oriented type things or more impromptu conversations? And striking the ideal balance in that environment has been the big question. We do have plans to continue this for a while, so we will hopefully learn how to do that better in the future. The first episode that we did of that was really just to verify that we could produce, using the available tools online, a podcast. So we're going to be working more at refining that in all of its aspects in the future. But I think next week or the week after that, I will have another podcast with my friend Tyler, and we're going to be working on trying to make these a little more engaging. All right, that's everything. Thanks, guys. You have a good one, and that's been Mark at Several Books. Bye-bye.